Why wasn't it me?
Carrie.
No, seriously. I really need to hear you say it.
Sex and the City is trending on TikTok and I've been desperate to talk about this. I'm obsessed with the topic. I think there's so much to dive into. What better than to learn from histories and older shows? And I'm just obsessed because this is one of those examples of a character that was the it girl of the time. Everybody loved her and she's aged really, really badly as a character. People don't like her and they find that Carrie Bradshaw herself is not this kind of woman they want to aspire to be, which is what everybody seemed to think at the time. It's always been more of a fun, light show, but there are some very psychological elements to it and it's more dark than you may have realized. So today, I want to give you guys some not only relationship advice, but dive into the relationship between Mr. Big and Carrie Bradshaw and why it went so wrong, including the dynamics that were at play in their relationship with the anxious attachment and avoidant attachment thing and how that played out, including her way of behaving like a pick-me without realizing it and all the ways that she embarrassed herself.
Is that you?
So this is going to be like a little chit chat about emotionally unavailable men, idealization and limerence in dating and the consequences of that, and why this show was not a good role model for women and why it was actually bad for women. And I hate to say it because I love Sex and the City, but wow, like this, it's not something to aspire to. Sex and the City, when it first premiered, broke a lot of barriers around expectations for young women living in New York City at the time, and it showed that actually there doesn't need to be an expectation to get married, and that's not necessarily the dream goal for women, is to settle down and have kids. And it showed these women partying it up, having relationships, having fun, and basically loving life. Even as they got older, it didn't matter to them. The age of the women in the show is actually something important because they really defied the whole spinster stereotype and being unmarried and childless stigma. That was a really big deal at the time. They're past the age of 29 and yet they're happy, they're healthy, and their narratives were not meant to be consumed by men. In so much media, women were just like the arm candy and the accessory, and men were the highlight, and it was so nice to see a female-centered show about their friendships. But people are now rewatching this show and realizing they didn't like Carrie as much as they thought they did. We prefer basically every other character in the show over her because her self-concept is so poor and so in the gutter that it's actually embarrassing to watch. Carrie and Big were the OG situationship of the time. They were a situationship before the word situationship was defined and it was a thing, which now people talk about in a casual way, meaning there's a relationship where it's undefined and normally you have to really fight hard for that label of relationship, and you're doing relationship things and you're being intimate, but it's not out and proud as like, yes, we're together, like it's official, shout it from the rooftops. Instead it's like, let's almost hide it and let's go see other people and pursue other options. And then it's very back and forth, and normally one person in this dynamic is unsatisfied, and that's become this new term very recently. Now, Carrie was meant to be this modern, confident woman to look up to maybe, or think was cool and fun, and she's beautiful, she's stylish, body is tea, she's looking good, she's living life in New York, and she seems to have this really cool career writing articles and columns, but actually a lot of them are centered around men and dating. And as much as she claims that she doesn't want to get married and she makes fun of her friends who are really wanting to be married and have kids and looks down on them for that, she, every time a man does come her path that she really likes, will drop everything for said man. From their very first meeting, she is absolutely captivated by Mr. Big's charisma and his allure. But his inability to commit to her, whether that's moving to Paris without really talking to her about it, marrying another woman, all serves to undermine her confidence. Even the fact that he doesn't want his family to meet her and know her name. But one thing the show really never let us down on was the drama. They were the OG toxic relationship. They were on again, off again. She'd say it was the last time and they were over, and then they'd end up inevitably back together again. He was like the traditional stereotype of like the sexy bachelor. He's had this whole past she doesn't know about. He's a bit of a playboy, emotionally reserved, smokes cigars, and is mysteriously rich, but his profession isn't really disclosed. But he's flirtatious and confident first and foremost, and very attractive, and that's what draws her to him. He tells her, I get it, you've never been in love. And she hasn't really been in love before. But then he tells her with this big smile that he has absolutely been in love before. And that's a very early conversation they have. And you can see that for her, it's like she sees him as that man she could fall in love with. But for him, it's like, this is a passing flirtationship, but I've done this before, I've been in love before, and basically she's not my dream woman. So it's alluded to even then that they're viewing this differently, and his done this rodeo before, like it's not new to him. And we see as this show continues that these two should not be together and should not have ended up together, because their dynamic is so embarrassingly imbalanced that in real life this kind of thing would never work, because you're meant to meet each other halfway. So a lot of you watching, I'm sure, will maybe have dated a guy like Mr. Big, because there's plenty of them out there. He isn't upfront about his past or his marriage, and then he acts like he's told her that before or they've brought it up, but he definitely hasn't brought it up before. And every time there's an argument, and she often rightfully does bring up a problem, he finds a way to gaslight her and manipulate it into not being a big deal, and just gives her a kiss and shuts the conversation down, and she falls for it every time. But she did hear that the first date he took her to was actually not a great restaurant. It's the kind of place you want to take someone where you want to hide that you're with them. And it was actually a really reasonable point for her to bring up with him. He manages to like twist the truth and maneuver it to say, no, like it's the best Chinese food in the city. And you never really know whether he's sincere or not. And it doesn't help that he is so devoid of any emotion. Their conversations go very much like, why didn't you call? And him replying, why didn't you call? Like they're children. And she caves so easily. It makes me laugh. All he needs to do is give her a compliment and touch her arm, and that's it. She just falls for him, and no matter how mad she is at him, she'll just start being in love with him again. Like he doesn't actually need to do anything particularly profound to win her. And that leads me to my overarching point, which is that I don't believe Carrie was in love with Big. I think she was in love with the chase and the drama, but not him. She loved his status and the life he could provide her and his money more than actually who he was as a person. I think he could have been anyone. I reckon she was drawn to the idea of the kind of lifestyle that he could provide her if they were married. And we know that she loves expensive shoes and designers, so maybe she was like, oh, this guy could bring me everything I want. Especially because he actually like rejects her friend who's blonde, and he's like, oh, I don't like blondes. But she's then taking on even more so as, oh my gosh, I need to prove that I can get him because he rejected my friend who everyone wants. So if he wants me, then he must really want me. So it almost solidifies more that she wants to keep him. But what's so interesting is I reckon that he rejected her friend. Who was it? Was it Samantha? Yeah, he rejected Samantha because I reckon he sensed that she would not take his bullshit. She wouldn't be okay with it. And so he went for Carrie because he could tell that she was someone that wouldn't have any boundaries. This is the perfect example of no matter how much you like a guy, no matter how much you give him, how nice you are, how well you communicate, if you're not the one, you're not the one. Even if he finds you physically attractive, if there's something about you that he doesn't want, that doesn't fit with his dream woman, then it actually doesn't matter how kind you are and how pretty you are, he won't want you. And that's something Carrie really struggles to get through her head is, okay, he's attracted to me, he likes me, he finds me funny. What am I doing wrong that isn't giving dream woman?
Carrie might be happy it's time to sweep in and shit all over it.
What?
The interesting thing though is that she doesn't really take advantage of his money even when she could or should, which shows she isn't really ready for this kind of life either. Like, he offers to pay for her apartment when she can't pay for it and she refuses. He offered a free vacation, she didn't want to go on it. So her self-respect is so low that even though that's what she thinks she wants, when the opportunity does arise to actually make the most out of it and use him a bit, she doesn't want to. She has also a massive overspending problem, which I think reflects her more impulsive nature and lifestyle, that she literally gets herself into debt and doesn't manage her finances properly, and then has the audacity to ask her friends for money. Her inability to budget and save shows this bigger thing around a denial of responsibility, and when there's a problem that's looking her in the face, she will ignore it. And so much bigger than just her relationship with Big, it's about how she avoids problems in her life and denies things that are there. Now, Big was never going to like her no matter what she did or how cool she played it, because she simply did not fit into what he wanted. She would have needed to be actually a different person in order for him to want her. And the truth is that he's part of the elite crowd and they have very certain expectations and they don't want to marry poor girls in his case, and he wanted someone in the same social circle as him. And unfortunately, because Carrie didn't fit into that, nothing she could have done would have fixed it. That's why Big wanted to marry Natasha, because she was a socialite. So when you're dealing with a situation where this man will never want you, and you know that, your self-concept has to be really low to keep seeking someone out who you know will meet you with rejection. If you have a concept of yourself where you're okay with putting yourself in vulnerable situations and not protecting yourself, then you will go for someone where you know they'll reject you and hurt your feelings. Whereas someone with higher self-esteem will sense that they're going to be rejected and treated badly, and because of their view of themselves in the world, they will only go for people who will worship them and kiss the ground they walk on, because they don't want to be in situations reaffirming their belief that they're not good enough. And unfortunately, in Carrie's case, I think she not only was sticking around for Mr. Big, but she was into it. Like, it was familiar to her being rejected the same way her dad had abandoned her, and so for her it was just a very familiar habitual pattern. And right now I'm making her sound like a very interesting, maybe relatable character, which you could learn a lot from, and actually sounds like a good character. But the problem with Carrie is that she never learns. So even when she's like 60, she's replaying the same relationship patterns over and over and over again. And she's low-key stalking him, like obsessing, ruminating, looking for where he is, following him around, following him to the church, coming into his apartment, and she has no boundaries. She's spending all of her mental and emotional labor on him until she's absolutely exhausted and depleted. And the ironic thing is her friends are sick of hearing about him, and it's not fair to them that she keeps going on about him all the time and neglecting spending time with her friends. She just drops everything. Like, if he makes plans, she's so scared of it not working out that even if it's not convenient for her, she'll accept the plans. She has no self-respect, and she will choose him, this selfish man, over her friends every time. She is so nice to him and so good to him when he treats her the worst, and her friends who are actually nice and good for her, she doesn't want to spend time on. And I think we've all been guilty of this at some point, of prioritizing romantic love over familial and friendship love, but actually it should never be prioritized, because it's not more important than any other kind of love. And the interesting thing is that she wants to believe she's cool. She's actually in a way self-obsessed, and she talks all the time about how she's the best thing that ever happened to him and how she's better off without him. But she's talking about it all the time to her friends. So it's one thing to say, you know, I'm worth it, but she goes on and on and on and on about how great she is. And so actually she's talking about him. She's ruminating on him. If she actually thought she was that great, she wouldn't need to say it all the time and how much she's over him. She would just be over him and find something else to talk about. And this is what makes her one of the most embarrassing characters I genuinely think I've ever seen in the history of all the shows I've watched, because it is just like genuinely like insufferable. She is everything that a woman with self-respect doesn't want to be. I think people were shocked rewatching this show thinking, I cannot believe I lapped this up 10 or 20 years ago, because actually this is nothing towards what I want to embody. Like, this is cringy and just like so embarrassing. At the time, people were thinking that Carrie should pursue him and that they were perfect together. And now people watch it and are shocked that she's calling him perfect and putting him in this massive pedestal above her. And if you're dating someone, you should never be actually seeing them as superior to you. And if you are, it's because you don't know them. If you knew them, you wouldn't be saying that. Your crush is just based on a complete lack of information about them and idealizing them in your head, because no one's perfect. No one has a perfect family, perfect job, perfect personality. They're going to have some kind of flaw, because that's what being human is. And she was always bringing herself down in a way and saying how he was perfect and she's just, she's whatever. The fact that we're re-examining her character is actually a bigger sign that we're all collectively becoming more mature and more aware of how this media affected us and how it doesn't really align with who we are as a generation anymore. And that times are changing. Back then, male power and violence was so romanticized that seeing a guy in a suit reject her and play hard to get was actually kind of sexy and alluring, whereas now it's just disturbing and not cute. Women were encouraged to be attracted to that kind of man at the time, whereas I think now people are like, okay, but what else is he offering? Like, she has access to her own career, her own life. What is he bringing in terms of value? But the heartbreaking thing is that Carrie really wants him, and she's devastated to think that he doesn't like her in return, and she just wants to be loved. She just wants him to care about her, and all he does time and time again is reject her. And it's that kind of heartbreak that is so deep and profound that you never really get over it. Like, you think about it years later and you think about, what did I do wrong? Why did this person not like me? Because rejection in itself is so uncomfortable. Like, when someone rejects us, we're like, why? Like, did I do something wrong? What is it about me they don't like? And why another girl and not me? Or maybe I just need to try harder, especially if it was going well at the start and then it goes wrong. You're left to just ruminate and think, okay, but was it me, or was there a problem from the start? And you're just left to your own devices. And this is something Carrie asks Mr. Big is, why wasn't it me? I just want to know. Because she just wants to understand what it is about her that's so unlovable that he didn't take one look at her and think, oh yeah, that's my dream woman, I want to pursue her. Like, what did she do that made him think, no, like, I don't really need her in my life. I don't really need to keep talking to her anymore. And it's heartbreaking. There's this scene where things end with this other guy she's dating, and Mr. Big comes back to talk to her and get her back, encourage her to move back to New York, and of course she caves pathetically instantly. Like, it's laughable. Like, it's so funny. She's like, okay, I'll just move back with you then, babe. But it again plays into this fantasy that they wanted women of the time to just lap up, which is that the person who broke you and hurt you the most can be the same one to put you back together again. That fantasy of that guy that rejected you will come back and you'll reconcile, and it'll be like this romantic scene, and you'll just daydream about it and be like, oh, like maybe one day he'll text me. And it was that kind of thing.
Because I don't live here anymore.
But the ironic thing is that she was just obsessed with the chase, because there were these red flags from the beginning. He never wanted to sleep over at her apartment. He didn't want boss, friends from work, mum, friends to know who she was. He often didn't apologize when he made her feel like there was something wrong with her, and he didn't want to make space for her in his life. He didn't want to make decisions factoring her in. It was just a passive reciprocation loop. Like, he often would come through, but right at the last minute when he knew he was going to lose her, when she was sobbing and at her breaking point. But you shouldn't have to ask someone to do things for you and ask them to text you and ask them to plan things. They just should. She doesn't want to beg him to take an interest in her friends, and she doesn't want to beg him to factor her into decisions when it comes to their future. She just wants it to come naturally to him and for it to be normal for him, and not to have to, like, sort of drag him like a show pony through every single stage of their relationship. At one point he gives her some flowers and balloons for her birthday, and she's like, oh my gosh, thank you, as if like it was all him. And he's like, oh no, my secretary knew about it and sorted it out. And she's so grateful, even though it was low effort and bare minimum. Like, he didn't put in the effort himself. And obviously she's reframing it in her head rather than seeing it how it is. And she's also reminiscing on how it used to be so great and stuff. But the truth is, if someone's treating you badly now, then the experience you thought you had with them that was good was never actually good to begin with, you know, and you must have missed some things. And that's what she's always doing, is reframing it into the way she wants it to be, because she just wants to be loved and by him. I do think she puts him on a pedestal because of his social status as well. She thinks it means something. But all he had to do was say, oh, you're welcome, like, my pleasure, when he does this nice thing with the balloons. But instead he has to put her in her place, and he has to humble her and remind her very explicitly, like, oh, like, it wasn't even me, my secretary did it. He very blatantly lets her know that he has no feelings for her. It's not like it's a secret. He's very explicit that he doesn't care about her, and she just chooses not to hear him. He never chose her. She was always the placeholder and the backup, and he settled, and he would rather have someone like Natasha, frankly, and she knew that. I do know some people who say that they love this couple and their relationship, because in real life they had a relationship very similar to Carrie and Big, and it worked out. They put their ego aside, their differences, they opened up to each other and fell in love and are now happily married. So I do think those cases exist, and in that case, bravo. But overall, this kind of narrative is very damaging for women, because it encourages us to go for men that are harsh and unkind with us and that don't chase us. And it's just the epitome of wounded femininity, frankly, because why would you want to go for someone that you're trying to win over, as opposed to a guy who's just like completely obsessed with you and would send you flowers and do anything for you. Like, I know I'd rather go for the latter because life's already stressful enough as it is. And what are you trying to prove? Why are you trying to prove something? Like, he should be chasing you. You've got nothing to prove. And even if you're rejected, like, it doesn't actually mean there's something wrong with you. Like, what one man doesn't like, another man will like. So it's not something that needs to be so deeply internalized. And this show is selling this narrative that if you stick around, the guy will change, which is so not often the case. And frankly, it was more than just him avoiding her. He actively hated her. Like, he disliked her. Sometimes in scenes where they're talking, he's looking at her and grimacing almost with disgust or pity, or even like he's mocking her. Like, he actively thinks she's a joke. That's not the look of a man in love. Like, he's genuinely like, ugh, gross. Darren Starr, the show's creator, actually said, I think that by Carrie and Big being together, the show ultimately betrayed what it was about, which is that women don't ultimately find happiness from marriage. So even he was like, I don't know about these two. There was an article from Bustle, which I thought was really illuminating, which talked all about everything, and it said you cannot through perseverance make someone love you, and was basically talking about how they grew up watching the original Sex and the City and fantasizing about one day creating a life for themselves that was similar to Carrie Bradshaw's glamorous Manhattan one. And they said, just like her, I dated a man like Mr. Big who was a decade older than me with slicked back hair to boot. Like Big, he was emotionally unavailable and would push me away every time we got too close. And the unhealthy relationship in Sex and the City, for that matter, led me to believe that the constant making up and breaking up cycle was just a standard part of being in love, and it took me a long time to learn that it wasn't. From the beginning of their romance, we see Bradshaw continually being emotionally abused by Big, and yet she still hangs on to the relationship. When Big tells her that he's going to relocate to Paris and she offers to move there with him, he just shrugs and says, I don't want you to uproot your life and expect anything. He refuses to introduce Carrie to his mother, calling her his friend when she confronts them together. In other words, Big constantly downplays the seriousness of their relationship. TV shows can portray a reality wherein a man is ambivalent about a woman, and the woman, through her perseverance, pushes a man through that ambivalence into commitment. So basically, there's already this phenomenon there, and then TV shows are creating it and taking it and making it even worse, and making us believe that through sheer persistence and pushing, we can make someone give us the love that we deserve. And to me, the most interesting part of this article was the part where he wants to relocate and she wants to make some sacrifices and go there too, and he says, I don't want you to uproot your life and expect anything, because when someone doesn't want to be generous with you, they don't want you to be generous with them. So the thought of her sacrificing that much to build a life with him was probably terrifying to him, and he must have been like, no, like, oh my gosh, I don't want you to sacrifice all that for me. I don't want you to like move for me and like come with me and have it be all serious. Like, let's just keep it low key. Let's keep it casual. Let's not like make all that fuss, right? Because when you genuinely don't see a future with someone, it's just awkward, right? You're like, please don't move with me. Like, don't put yourself on the line for me like that. And it's what someone who's emotionally unavailable does. And Carrie, being like the anxious attachment, just constantly wants clarification on what they are and what they're doing. Sex and the City really normalized these toxic and abusive relationship dynamics. And I think that it was really focused on the allure of the chase over the substance of the actual relationship itself, and painting having a solid, stable relationship as something maybe boring, which is dumb because that's not true. Many women mistake emotional unavailability for just complexity or depth, or maybe that they've done something wrong, and spend a lot of time in their head sort of ruminating about how to win the guy, as opposed to actually looking at what he's done and if he's genuinely interested. And if you flip the genders, it can be the same thing. Many men spend way too much time focusing on a woman's actions and trying to ignore the fact that she's actually not reciprocating.
I could run, or I could stand and ask him the question that, if I didn't ask, would haunt me the rest of my life.
It's normally what happens when you have low self-esteem and you're seeking validation, because when you're someone that doesn't care, you're more of a trendsetter, you do your own thing, and you don't really mind about fitting in so much, and you don't mind if someone doesn't want to go out with you, because you're just going to go find someone that does want you, and you do take things less personally. It bounces off you a lot more. And in Carrie's case, I think she really was used to almost that unavailable partner, and when someone available and nice did come up, she didn't want them. Carrie also has this obsession with closure and with knowing, which is maybe the worst thing, to think that you're going to benefit in any way from closure or from getting an answer, because quite often the answer is going to be a lot more unsatisfying than what you had expected. Carrie is always the one pushing, and she tells Big, I need a sign, just tell me I'm the one. And he looks at her sadly and says nothing because she's not the one. He only shows up when she's happy and ready to move on, which is definitely his narcissistic tendencies, because it bruises his ego and he wants to know that he can push her buttons and she'll come right back to him. It's actually a narcissistic behavior known as hoovering, which is when the narcissists reach out for the victim when they sense that the victim is basically pulling away, and they try and like drag them back in again. It's very, very unhealthy. And the truth is, if someone really likes you, they want a relationship with you, they're going to want to introduce you to their world and their family and their friends. And even when she's trying to be friends with him, she later realizes that actually he's engaged to Natasha, and it really upsets her, and she confides that she feels like maybe he chose Natasha because she's more soft and compliant, and that Carrie herself was too wild for him, which is a very odd conclusion to draw, that she's focused again on her flaws and how she wasn't good enough for him. So often then she's acting like it's something she's been blindsided by, when she's known from the start, from like season 1, that he had a wandering eye, and he's always been this way. He's always been someone a bit fickle, so it shouldn't be a surprise to her, and yet she's acting blindsided by it. But I guess again she takes it personally and uses it to reaffirm that she's not worth anything, because one minute he's telling her he can't commit and he doesn't want to remarry, and the next minute he's engaged to this woman. In like 6 months, he's like, yeah, I want to marry you. And she's like, what? But you never wanted to be with me, and we were together for so long, and you were never wanting to propose to me. So what did this girl do to get the ring and I didn't? And again, she is literally looking for that information to prove her lack of worthiness. Even when he dies, we find out that he left his ex-wife Natasha $1 million in his will. And again, this is something that Carrie wasn't clear on, because they never communicated. They had terrible communication, and that was the case right from the beginning, where they didn't talk about if they were exclusive or not, because they literally were acting like high schoolers. And at first I felt so sorry for her, but after a while I was like, okay, seriously, we're dealing with a woman who's like in her 30s and her 40s and her 60s, and she's still behaving the same way and not learning anything. And it's literally embarrassing. Like, at first it was kind of fun, but then hearing her internal narration with this whole self-pitying thing and confusion about why he didn't love her, like, it literally made me want to like throw away my laptop, because I just could not stand the sound of her voice anymore. Like, I was like, oh, it's so lame. But you know, we hate her because we've been her. And at some point we've all been a pick-me, where we're just obsessed with getting a guy to want us, and where we fall into like obsession and limerence over one particular guy or one particular girl and just can't seem to let it go, and spend so much more time daydreaming about them than just being in an actual relationship with them. Carrie's life and her identity and her emotions and everything was attached to Big, and it was fully dependent on how things went with him. And I do think that he really cared about her, but he was really scared of being vulnerable and very emotionally stunted as well, so he wouldn't allow himself to express too many kind things or get too involved with her. And he was way too worried about what other people would think as well, and whether she would be accepted into his society, which again showed that he was putting himself first over his love for her. That's the kind of thing a child does, or a teenager, where you're worried about what your friends will think if you date someone outside the social group. But you would hope that at his age it's the kind of quality he would have grown out of. And as much as we love to villainize Big and talk about how he's a narcissist and how he treated her badly and with a real lack of decorum and respect and honor, which I fully agree with, I also think that Carrie was very much engaging with that dynamic and choosing to spend time with him, and she was also really immature and she couldn't set boundaries with him. Like in the fart episode, you know, she farts and she's just killing herself because apparently women can't fart, and just absolutely devastated and mortified over it and worried that he'll judge her for it. But then rather than just communicating, she goes into this whole story in her head about it and runs from there, and she does that a lot rather than just openly communicating with him. Same thing with her saying to him, tell me I'm the one. It's very childish, like, often one person says I love you and the other person doesn't immediately say it back. You need to give them the space to decipher their own feelings for you and say it in their own time. You can't just bulldoze someone into saying I love you back or you're the one. And you should never have to tell a man, tell me I'm the one. It's weird. Like, don't, rather than you telling him what to do or telling him how to behave, because you're so worried of feeling the pain, you're so worried about the emotions that will come up, don't you want to know what he'd say? Like, rather than saying it for him and putting words in his mouth, don't you want to know what he would do? Because the problem with Carrie is she's so busy controlling everything and obsessing and micromanaging him that she never gets a chance to see what he would do if she took her foot off the wheel for 1 second and stepped back. When you're controlling everything, that's the problem, is then you'll never know what he would have done. And I reckon that was part of the fear for her, is like, if I step back and I don't initiate anything, he won't do anything, so I've got to do it. But she doesn't want to do that, and so she's effectively giving him an ultimatum, like, tell me that I'm the one, tell me you love me. So they're literally the epitome of the anxious and avoidant attachment styles, where one person's the chaser, one person's the runner. And sometimes it also gets worse when you establish that dynamic from the beginning, because since it was always that way of her wanting to be with him and him being cold, it's very hard to then suddenly change around the dynamic, because that's the way it's always been with the two of you. And the funny thing is that if you look at their first meeting, when he knocks over her bag on the street when they first meet, he doesn't even properly try to help her grab her stuff and put it back in her bag. He barely does anything, and he even seems to have a judgmental look on his face that she's got condoms in her bag. So he was never a gentleman right from the start. And all she had to do, her only job, her only responsibility, was to just walk away at the first sign of disrespect. That's all she had to do, and she couldn't do it. And it's really, really, really sad. It highlights to me as well, like, maybe that the show was trying to send a greater message that women are taught that marriage and kids are so important, and as they're getting older, characters like Carrie are starting to panic and thinking, I need to find someone. Subconsciously they feel pressured to do so, and so they just really feel like they need that sense of validation through a romantic partner. And we've been socialized to believe that we can only self-actualize through our partners and make something of ourselves through the men in our life. Whereas what's so interesting is that men have been taught actually the other way around, which is play the field, you know, don't take things too seriously. And basically, if you get like shackled to a girl, like, you're gonna get cuffed, you're gonna be chained down, you're gonna lose yourself, you know, you're not gonna go out with the boys anymore and have a good time, and you're basically going to lose your independence, and you're gonna be weak, so don't be too nice to a girl. And while women have been taught to make themselves small and be apologetic and be kind, men have been taught to actually be cold and basically put their feelings first and not behave in a gentlemanly way that really means they're just being polite and respectful to women. Because Big wasn't being polite and respectful, he was just thinking about himself and his own needs first and foremost. And you can really see that larger societal dynamic at play in their relationship, because all she's thinking about is him and his needs, and I can guarantee he's not thinking about her at all. So thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think about their relationship down in the comments, and I will see you for the next one.